and 3, and we are live for another beautiful episode of This Uncanny Earth, starring yours truly, Mr. Robert Solomon, aka the Alchemist of the Uncanny. Above me, because that's how it looks on my screen, is the one and only Spider, my co-host, who's got some fresh hair growing there, buddy. You're gonna have to get a haircut at some point, my guy. And also our host for tonight, the one, the only, the tie-dyed menace himself, Steven. Gentlemen, how are we doing this week? Are we ready for a brand new episode to do brand new episodic things?
Yes, we are bringing back Count Saint Germain tonight.
Oh, that will be a heavy hitter. That's a name that has not been said in quite some time. Welcome, everyone, to another fantastic episode 346. Hello, Cheyenne. How are you doing? Welcome on in. We are live and we are about on episode 346. We are 4 episodes away from our 350th show. We are the best kept paranormal secret out there. Tell your friends, tell your family that we are here. Come listen every Thursday night, 10 to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're not going to regret it. Great conversation with great men. Gentlemen, what do we have going on? Is there any business that anybody like to talk about? Anybody like to talk about some business? You gonna get anybody some shop your ways with the business?
Well, everything is still going well with Uncanny Media. As you can see, we got all the new logos. We got the new merch. There is still a sale going on at theuncanyshop.com. It's theuncanyshop.com. It's a 15% off sale. You got the code at the top of the screen in that website if you want to go take a look. You got hoodies, you got shirts, you got mugs, you got posters, you got my greasy ass face on a shirt looking at you like gross. This.
I don't like
so,
that.
You know, I mean, whatever you like, we got it there.
You should wash your face.
I probably should more than, once a day.
Yeah, probably like 3 times.
We'll put his face on a towel.
Yeah,
you can wipe your own face with my face. Wouldn't that be
the irony? The irony. The irony.
Just for trivia purposes, before we continue with the show itself, I want to point out, I mentioned this in our little private chat a few days, like maybe a week or so ago. By the way that we've measured these episodes, we're on season 28. 28 seasons. 28 seasons of this show. So how many other shows that you listen to can boast 28 seasons?
But it's a shame we didn't get over 1,000 episodes in our first season.
Well,
that's a little bit much.
There's more than 1,000 episodes in a year, I suppose. That'd be a bit much.
It happened in One Piece.
Don't get me started on those pirate girls. Anyway, we're done. Let's move on.
Yeah,
we got a show.
Steven. Let's get the show rolling.
All right. So first off, let's go over what we all know about Lemuria first. So Rob, why don't you get us started? What do you know about Lemuria?
So Lemuria is a sort of land bridge that connected India and a couple other places in the Indian Ocean. And it was thought to not exist, but then scientists, I believe in the 1930s, 1938, were like, hey, we found something was here. Something was here at some point due to some zircon being found on the shores of India. And they were able to say that there was a land bridge that connected this large continent. Some people say it exists. Some people say it doesn't exist. People like Helena Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society believe that it was a place where there was a 4-armed hermaphroditic entity that would later evolve into lemurs. So tall, short lemurs. These are 15 foot beings. So how you get 15 feet, I think a lemur probably is like 2 feet. So
some stuff was exaggerated for the book.
Well, I mean, dinosaurs turned into pigeons, so it's not that far off.
Whatever. That's all lie. Just like Australia being a continent, it's not real. I'm kidding.
And what about you, Spider? What do you know about Lemuria?
Well, the biggest thing that I knew about it was that, as Rob mentioned, it was part of the Theosophical Society's central doctrines. It was supposedly, according to Helena Blavatsky, who was also a member of the Thule Society that we've talked about in the past, which
she was
part
acting a fool with her pants on the ground.
Nazi Germany. She believed that it was the ancestral home of humans, that's where we actually began from, and it was that reason that the landmass was sunk. It has a lot of interplay with the Atlantis mythology, which I'm sure you're going to get into. And it also plays into some real world things because it's mentioned once or twice in the Conan the Barbarian mythos with Hyperborea, which is going to lead into something I'm going to be talking about next week. So it's all kind of connected in a weird mythological, real world sort of way.
All right. So first off, let's go ahead and I'll briefly, go over what you've discussed and go into a little more detail with that real quick without going too deep, though. So basically, yes, you're both right. It was initially believed to have been in the Indian Ocean as a landmass to connect two different lands, specifically because they found lemur bones, and they're like, well, how else could the lemurs get here? So they decided that there had to be some sort of landmass, and that pretty much covers that aspect of it. So now for the more interesting part. As Spider mentioned a second ago, Helena Blavatsky was one of the earliest people to mention this, along with James Churchward. And when she mentioned this, the first time that she mentioned it was in her book, The Secret Doctrine, which basically created I guess you could call it a religion or a spiritual practice of theosophy. And Aleister Crowley was a big believer in that. He slept with the book under his pillow, supposedly. But, so, just to give you a heads up, not a lot of people liked Helena Blavatsky when she was alive, but she was also not the first person to mention Lemuria. From my research, it seems that she actually co-authored it or co-opted it from earlier people like scientists and stuff like that, but nobody actually took it seriously until she started talking about it. And even then it was like many years later before people actually took it seriously. So the first thing I wanted to get into from here is basically like the origins. As Spider mentioned a second ago, Helena Blavatsky was talking about Lemuria and how they were the third root race, one of the earliest forms of humanity. And she believed that they basically went into hiding and they went into the earth, which is supported by Native American legends from Hopi in Native Americans. And they say their origin story is there was a great cataclysm and their people had to flee into the earth, which was the end of what they called the third world. And then they eventually came back out after everything was safe. They eventually managed to come back out into what we are now, which is what they called the fourth world. So do either one of you have any questions so far? Let's go with you first, Rob.
What were the other three worlds?
I actually don't know that part.
Okay. Well, this is your homework for next week. Find out what the other three worlds are, and then we'll talk about it in a brief not synopsis, but a brief discussion before Spider gets into becoming Conan the Barbarian or whatever he said at the beginning. So.
All right.
Calm down, brother.
And Spider, what did you have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do want to point out a couple of interesting things about this. Again, Helena Blavatsky, she was very polarizing, but she influenced a lot of occult thinkers. You mentioned Aleister Crowley, and he built a lot of what he did off of her earlier statements and earlier research. And a lot of what became things like the Golden Dawn or the Rosicrucians and some of those drew very heavily on Blavatsky's early Theosophic Society writings and ideas. So regardless of whether she was correct or whether she was in her right mind, she was very influential. And I want to get back to another thing you mentioned about the multiple worlds of the what was it, Hopi, right?
Yeah, the Hopi.
That's a very interesting parallel with the Jewish Kabbalah idea of how there were previous spheres, so to speak, which were basically previous worlds built by Yahweh before we got to this one. And each one of them now is dark and inhabited by demons, according to Kabbalic writings and things of that nature. So there's some parallels and different points, completely opposite parts of the world that sound very similar. And to add a little bit to your homework assignment, but to give you a little bit of context, each of the previous worlds were supposed to be destroyed in a particular way. One of them was by water, one of them was by fire. This one that we're in, I don't remember what it's supposed to be destroyed by, because this is one of them. This is one of the worlds that's supposed to be destroyed in a certain kind of cataclysm. But they're all specific because they match certain things that have happened in history, which is the climate changing or the Great Flood or various other things, which connects it to the world narrative, which is, again, very interesting because you've got these disparate cultures all buying into the same basic history of the planet. So, interesting stuff.
And quick question. Quick question. Was Blavatsky, was she a Nazi?
No.
Like,
she wasn't specifically, no.
Did she have supremacist leanings? I'm not saying a Nazi, but did she believe that like the
like the Aryan thing?
Like a racial superiority aspect.
My understanding from what I looked into is that she didn't necessarily believe that far into it. Not saying she didn't, but what I researched focused more on the Nazis actually being inspired by her writing and it being their own thing. Not like they were actually working together.
She herself.
Snyder did mention that she was a Thule, so he might have a better understanding than I do about
she
her.
herself didn't say that there was a specific like race that was above all others, because that's one thing that the old occultists used to. They didn't particularly set out to say that there was a race above all else. They set out to say that there was a society of thinkers, of people of a similar mindset that eventually led to our modern idea of Illuminati and things like
frequency.
That. The secret masters and things of that nature.
Yes, not to
the secret masters.
Sorry, not to interrupt you, but I did want to say you got me excited when you mentioned that because she was actually one of the earliest inspirations, as you said, for secret societies and cults.
And so while I don't think
the Rosicrucians.
Yeah, I don't think she believed specifically in Aryan philosophy as a supremacist group.
Yeah.
I think the ideas she had were used as proof that such was the correct way of thinking, which just goes to show that if you are a philosophical person, that you have to be mindful of how you present what you think.
You have to be careful.
Because people will use it either for war or money
anything
or for something else. They'll always try to use it for a different goal than what you presented it as. Yeah. So, and I think that's what happened there.
Yep, definitely. I can definitely agree with that. Because a lot of what I've researched, there are, I don't know how large this group of people is, but there's a group of people that believe very strongly that Helena Blavatsky actually had access to secret hidden information that could have gotten her in a lot of trouble. And she said that she channeled this information like as a spirit medium. And so a lot of people believe that maybe she had access to secret information and she was able to reveal it through her book by saying she channeled it, and that kept her safe so that she could reveal the information to the rest of the world.
That's not uncommon either, because John Dee was in high favor of the court in England because of his philosophies and his prophecies and his Enochian language and various things. And sometimes people will do that, even if you're a legitimate philosopher of these kind of things. Sometimes you're thinking, you know what? I can make a quick buck off these people because these people don't know nothing. And I'm really smart and I got these ideas. and I might as well give them the just basic drippings to give myself a nice high life and to live really well. So even if they have a good thing and they know they're kind of tuned into the secrets of the universe for real, they might kind of dilute it a little bit just to
Yeah.
live a more comfortable life and to not get hanged or to get kicked out or whatever, as certain countries might do. So it's not unheard of.
And like that's actually a very good point that you bring up, because she was actually one of the first people to speak about the law of attraction before it became popularized by the more modern book, The Secret. She actually spoke of that in her book all that time ago.
Mm.
And I did take a minute to look up about the first two worlds of the Hopi tribe. And it says that the first world was created by the sun spirit Tawa and inhabited by insect-like creatures who lived unhappily in caves. These insect-like creatures are going to be very important to our story later on. According to Hopi tradition, this world was corrupted not by evil, but by forgetting the creator's plan, which sounds similar to Gnosticism, if anyone knows anything about that. As people began to quarrel and lose their spiritual connection, Sotokunang and Taiwa decided the world had to be destroyed. So this kind of sounds like the Anunnaki with Inkian and Lil again. And so they decided the world had to be destroyed. The chosen people who remembered the creator were guided by Sokunang to safety through the doors at the tops of their heads and took refuge underground with the ant people as the first world was destroyed by fire. The second world emerged after the destruction of the first. It was beautiful but flawed. Animals no longer trusted humans and remained separate from them. Despite this, people again forgot the creator's plan, leading to the world's destruction. This time, the earth was destroyed by ice. That kind of sounds like the Ice Age.
Mm.
Once more, those who remembered were saved by the ant people. The world was then reactivated after the poles were moved and the earth restored to life, creating the third world. So now I'd like to ask, do either one of you already have any knowledge of the ant people?
Yeah, I talked about the ant people in a couple presentations I've done
On the
regarding
giants?
the world switch,
Okay.
because it's a very interesting aspect because that's not the only um, culture that talks about a group of beings saving them from disaster. There's a couple other different tribes and things that talk about people coming out from below the earth, and bringing them down with them. There's also, we can't forget, obviously Noah's Ark's one of those
Yep.
sort of ideas where God says, "Get on the boat," and they get on the boat. There's also an Aztec myth about where the giants are trying to escape the flood, so they retreat into high waters and they retreat to a place that is almost like a monastery in China or like Tibet, like a Tibetan monastery, but in South America. And so they're welcomed into that like city almost. And there's a giant lake out in front. So this isn't a new concept of beings, whether they be extraterrestrial or ant related, that come up to the surface or come down from the heavens and say, okay, yoink, we're picking you up, we're going to move you here, or follow us down into the depths of these caves so that the flood, the fire, the ice, all of that can't get to you. So it's an interesting concept because what we see here is we see a sort of protector race, is the best way that I can put this, that's always watching us. It's
Yeah.
always seeing what we're doing, how we're doing, which also translates borderline to guardian angels as well. And there's always a protector race, always in almost every single flood
Timeline.
myth or world-ending catastrophe
Yes.
that happens. There's a protector race or God or aliens, however you want to put it.
I call them observers.
Or observers, and that's a good way to put it too. They don't intervene, they just watch, and then when things get cataclysmic, they say, okay, all you people come down here with us, and we'll protect you until the earth is ready and renewed for you to go back upon the surface to then do what you have to do.
And what's interesting to me is a lot of these stories about the observers and the ant people and all these other, let's call them heroes, they always talk about how they remember things from the source, whatever you want to call that. And I think that really stands out to me as well. Spider, what about you? Do you know anything about them already?
A fun thought experiment here is that, especially within not only Native American tribes, but also in Viking tribes and some of the early Celt tribes, is that they were all identified with a totem. They might have been identified with the bear or the wolf or certain kinds of another creature in nature. And they were then called the people of the bear or the people of the wolf. And here we have the people of the ants. And so you think about it, and at first glance, you think, oh, ant people, they must be insect people. They must be monsters that came out of whatever, and they're different species. But then the more you think about it, you have to think about how these people presented themselves and how they described their neighbors. These are the people of the bear. They're the bear people. They're not actually bears in clothes walking around being people. It's the bear was their totem. So
their symbol.
From under the ground, you have these people who lived in caves, who lived in tunnels, who lived in places like ants in an ant hive. Yep. They're the ant people. They aren't necessarily an entirely different species or entirely different race. They could be different human people that have lived underground, but they knew more than the people above ground knew about what was going on. They said, hey, we've seen this before. Come down with us. We got stuff down here to take care of you. Yeah. Don't worry about it, which is another interesting parallel with another ancient people in Mesopotamia. You have the Sumerians, who in their original writing were described as the black-headed people, probably because they either had black hair or they had dark skin, and they came up out of the ground. The Anunnaki brought them out of the ground to serve them because they lived in caves. They lived in tunnels. So again, you have another parallel from across the world, and it's just another form of human people that we maybe haven't discovered yet, or that has been lost to time. And the best description we have is, well, they're the ant people because they live underground.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. And I didn't think about that either, because I always thought ant people that they were ants, right?
Yeah, see the symbolism.
Like they were ant, half human hybrids. But ants live in mounds, which would be
I love the way he
a mound wouldn't be an underground thing, but it would be an enclosed thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Darkness. So it doesn't necessarily mean they were half human, half ant, which, to be fair, would be terrifying. It'd be terrifying. Yeah, it doesn't mean that they weren't half ant, half human, but now that you have kind of shown some light, shine some light on that, I think that they might have actually been called ant people because of how they lived underground,
like Spider said.
And so, yeah, that's a very good concept. I never, not
maybe,
once have
maybe
I thought
Spider should be the alchemist.
See, my deal is, and I probably, we've got the fantastical and we've got the basic scientific, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. Because there's a little bit of fantasy and there's a little bit of science, and somewhere in there, there's the truth.
I agree.
We have to, and I think the reason I don't really think about it in terms of how you said it is because in every culture there's always a creature, and it's not, the creatures they're creatures. They're not humans with that act like creatures. They're legit creatures. You know what I mean? Because they give them the characteristics of creatures.
Yeah.
Right. They even say, hey, these are, and they'll say, like, this is a dragon that was on the mountain. It wasn't people. It was a legitimate dragon, whether that be a winged creature that they just worship, because a lot of times people worship things that they didn't understand. They thought, oh, this is beyond my realm of comprehension. We might as well worship it because I don't know what else we're going to do. We need to worship that thing because it's large, like the Thunderbirds. Those kinds of things that were in that sphere real. So having that as like a constant, I don't think, well, maybe these are people that maybe wore ant-like helmets. You know what I mean? Because maybe they couldn't
Yeah.
take the sun. Maybe they were almost like a Morlock kind of a race that had to exist underground, or if they existed above ground, they existed in another place and they were able to freely move around in the tunnels and they knew the cave systems. So they could have very well been much like you see some of the pagan tribes with the antlers and the antler helmets. They're not deer people because deer people are usually said, hey, they got half hooves and a male body, but same basic concept. Maybe they worshipped ants, or maybe they thought ants were the greatest thing since sliced bread. Because a lot of time, like you said, the tribe of the bear or the tribe of the wolf, they view these animals as powerful entities, spirits, if you will, not just animals. So why wouldn't you worship that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
However, I didn't think that maybe they just wore ant-like helmets. Maybe they wore helmets that had the ant-like mandibles. And the best way that tribe could use to describe them was say, you know what, they look like ants. You want to call them the ant people? There you go. There it
People
is.
of the ant, people of the
People
bear,
of the ant.
people of the wolf, people of
Yep.
the ant. It just makes sense because there's so many generations between when this stuff was set down and us. And we already know, even in biblical things, that you have to kind of read between the lines with some of the descriptions because people were writing things hundreds of thousands of years after the events happened and remembering them as best they could. And you can't take everything as a literal, this is what it is. You kind of have to read into it a little bit because of so many different generations that have passed between then and now.
Yep. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the next section. So, before we move on, I would like to mention very briefly, there is often a lot of confusion between Lemuria and Mew. I also had a lot of confusion with this because half the stuff I've done research into in this topic calls it Lemuria, half of it calls it Mew for short, and half of it says it's two different locations. But I've done enough research now that I think I finally traced it back, and I think the big confusion arises from, as we mentioned earlier, Madame Blavatsky originated, kind of the popularizing of Lemuria with her book, and she said that Lemuria was in the Indian Ocean, as we mentioned earlier, that landmass. Now, James Churchward actually suggested that Lemuria was also an ancient civilization. Mew suggested Mew was an ancient civilization located in the Pacific Ocean. And I think that's where all our confusion arises, is they're both the same ancient civilization. It's just two different people thought they might have been in two different locations. And I think that's where the confusion comes from.
See, I think that for me, it was more that there's one here and there's one here.
Maybe.
And because, I mean, if you think about it, it's not far off to say that there was other land masses, right? Science says they know due to plate tectonics, but if you weren't there, you don't really know.
Yeah.
You could say plate tectonics all day, but we talk about pole shifts, right?
Yes.
And that spot is not the only place where there's a pole shift. There's a book that was written about how when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, that was essentially a pole shift. To keep human beings from getting into the garden again, they shifted the poles. And when the flood happened, the poles shifted again.
Yeah.
So it seems like this is a consistent thing that poles do shift. And so what I'm thinking is when these poles shift, land masses shift.
Yes.
And because you have Pangea, right, where all the continents
we have
interlock.
proof of that.
You have all the continents interlocking together and then separating. Who's to say that there's part of that didn't break off into a place in the Indian Ocean that did create that land bridge to India? Or who's to say there wasn't one? Because the Mew I saw had Hawaii included with it. It was sitting in the Pacific Ocean as a big continent, and they counted Hawaii being part of that. And maybe, and I don't know, I'm not a geologist here, but maybe Hawaii was once part of the
Lemuria.
civilization of Mu, because Lemuria was the Indian Ocean. I think that that's the Indian Ocean, and
Yes.
then Mu was the Pacific Ocean, because obviously they're different oceans. Um, and so it's not too far fetched to say, okay, here's Hawaii. Maybe Hawaii is was once a, you know, a part of Mu, and then the volcano
Hmm.
that erupted ended up destroying a good chunk of Mu. And
Yes.
so what you have left now is, you know, Hawaii, Kauai, Maui, you know, all those places, but that's it. It's a smaller version of something that was massive, you know, 84 million years ago. Because people automatically say, well, nothing was, you know, people weren't that smart, or you know,
Yeah.
there wasn't any people. But we don't know this.
They might be smarter than we are today.
I've always believed that ancient civilizations aren't smarter than us. They're smarter in a different way.
Yes,
Like
they're
like
more
we
spiritual.
we can do things that they couldn't, and they can do things that we can't, because
Like,
they understood things different.
ooh, the
They
UFO
understood physics
technology.
different. Almost, but more of like they were in tune, because if your poles
Yeah.
are shifted, right, things are going to act different. They're not going to act the same. When it shifts one way, things are going to act a certain way. When it shifts another way, they're going to act a certain way. So maybe in this pole shift, they were able to do things that we couldn't, because it was impossible for us to do it. But once the pole shifted again, that opened up our way of living. Just some food for thought.
Yes.
The other thing before we move on from this, and I know we're digging right into Steven's concept, so I apologize for that.
No, you're good.
But the
I've
one
got a
thing
few
that I
things.
don't think we consider as a scientific community often enough is the actions of the planet itself as far as human history is concerned. Because we'll talk about, oh, at this point there was a famine, or at this point there was this going on and it affected human migration. But we don't often consider just how drastically the planet has altered its own self. With the continents splitting apart, with all the land masses arising and disappearing, and when you talk about the volcanoes and things, we don't know for sure exactly how many volcanoes have occurred in the history of the planet. We can get a rough estimate. We can say, oh, yeah, it's in this many billion years of the planet, there must be this many volcanoes. But that doesn't tell you exactly where they were, what the exact effects were, what the landscape did to change around it. Earthquakes, numerous tsunamis, that because the power of water is huge, it can reshape entire coastlines. Hurricanes have decimated the United States for a number of years, and so you have to think about how much has been swallowed up by the planet itself that we may never be able to find, because it's that much of a total just wipe clean slate. Because that's what happens in some of these major disasters. The ice age itself, the glaciers just flattened everything for hundreds of thousands of miles, tore up the land, destroyed everything, changed the entire landscape for hundreds of years to come. And I don't think we give that enough credit. There could be more continents that have been completely obliterated, just torn into tiny pieces that we don't know about because we haven't seen the evidence of it. But because we haven't seen the evidence, it doesn't necessarily mean they aren't there. It just means that we can't see those billions of years where the planet was just like, you know what? Screw y'all. I'm doing this. I'm
Yep.
doing this. I'm reorganizing this. This ocean's over here now. Deal with it. And there's nothing you can do about that. That's how the history was. And there wasn't always a human being there to record it. As
The
much
fifth
as we want there
extinction.
to be, there wasn't always somebody there on hand to write it down or to make some kind of a mark. And we've lost innumerable amounts of history
Yes.
that way, and in numerous places of where we used to live that way. So it's kind of arrogant to just assume that we know exactly the path of human growth from one point to another without taking that into account, because I think we're never going to know that. unless we perfect time travel technology, which we're getting into sci-fi fantasy, there's no way to go back and find out. There's no carbon samples you can take. There's no this. There's just it's
Unless time is
holes
fluid and the
in
past,
the.
present, and future are all happening right now.
I think too. I think it's. I want to say it's Third Barak, or I'm trying to remember which one it is, but there is an apocryphal book in the Old Testament where they find a tablet, and it's Noah's like grandson, and he finds this tablet that was from the Watchers, and there was two tablets made. There was a tablet that would resist fire, and a tablet that would resist water.
The Akashic
So
interfaces.
so these tablets, one was destroyed obviously because it was destroyed by water, but the other one survives. And so it's forbidden knowledge. So what I'm thinking is when the flood happened, because there's a pre-flood and then there's a post-flood, right?
Mhm.
Pre-flood times we're probably 100% different. That's when you had the fallen ones, that's when you had the Watchers, and the things that were taught and the way the world looked and the way people lived. Because what I like to measure that too is the Sumerian kings list. These kings lived for such long, like 10,000, 50,000, 20,000 years. Then there's a break, and then you start getting into like 120 years. You start getting to like, okay, 80 years.
They changed our DNA.
I don't think it's so much the DNA that was changed. I think that the way the earth worked, gravitational, because the reason we age so much is because of gravity. Gravity is what does the most damage to us, to our bodies. That's why people shrink.
Yeah.
People shrink
That's
as
why
they
we don't
get
have
as they
giants
get
anymore.
older. And so what I'm thinking is when you're dealing with something like that, when you're dealing with a pre-flood where people are living very long time, right? Then you're dealing with a post-flood where people aren't living so long. It's because the whole environment changes. Your food's going to change. Animals are going to change. The animals in the food that lived at one point don't exist, right? Even if you get 2 by 2 on the flood or on the ark or however that worked, right? I think there were still animals that were left off of the ark. It's quite possible.
Yeah.
And if you're not eating the plants, right, that have those specific nutrients to keep you alive for thousands of years, and then you go to eating plants that are only going to keep you alive for maybe 100 to 120 years, because there's people that live to be 120 in this day and age. There's people live a long time. And so that's the thing that we have to understand, is that in that situation, I think that that's something that could happen. Just putting that out there.
Just a quick note to the chat here, by the way. We're just coming up with some various theories and ideas. We're not saying for sure that this happens and this doesn't happen. So, if you're going to be in the chat, you got to be nice. You got to be fair. You can tell us we're full of it. That's fine. But be nice. Okay. We're not trying to promote conspiracies or BS. We're just coming up with things that we think may have happened. This isn't like, obviously,
none of this is proven. Obviously, we don't have proof for this.
We like having fun
we would have
conversations.
said that. If you would listen.
We would provide sources if we had them.
We would provide sources. So before you get on your little rant, understand something. This is all theories. And you should look that word up when you get a chance. Okay? Look that word up when you get a chance.
Yeah.
Play nice.
So, Rob, as you have mentioned so many things that I have to get into now.
That's so fine.
You mentioned Hawaii and how it might be part of Mu. Now, here's another theory I came across during my research, was some people have suggested that maybe Mu and Lemuria were actually part of the same ginormous landmass that spread from one ocean all the way to the other, because, and they support this theory by saying that the Easter Island statues look like Lemurian architecture, according to the myths, obviously, according to what they say their architecture looked like. And they also say that there could just be like giant landmass under the ocean that we haven't discovered yet, and it got buried under all that. So that's one theory that I thought was very interesting. And there was some other stuff, but I forgot what it was, and we're running low on time, so we're just going to move on to the next part now. So we're going to go over to Mount Shasta. Do either one of you know anything about that one? I'm sure you do. We'll let Spider go first this time.
I have, in a lot of my studies, I've heard about it and I've read about it. I don't want to take your thunder this late into the show, though, because since we're running low. So I'm not going to comment too much on it. I'm going to let you take the reins on it. I don't want to get into another.
Rob, anything you want to say before I pull out the big guy?
You shouldn't. Okay, this isn't that kind of show. Okay, first of all, if you're
like
pulling that out, all right, calm down, Chief, calm down.
I'm
the only thing what I do know, and this is just a short little blurb, is what are known as the Watchers that are said to watch out at the cities and things.
Yeah,
and that's it. Like, people have tried to go up to them and they disappear. That's one of the big things I know about Mount Shasta.
All right. There is so much amazing stuff around Mount Shasta, from Bigfoot to Sasquatch to even Bat Squatch. Yes, you heard me right. There have been reports of Bat Squatch. They got ghosts, they got spirits, they got secret societies, they got Lemurians, they even got Count Saint Germain up here.
Oh, that's what it is.
Yep, that's what we were waiting for.
That's what we're waiting for.
Yep. In the early 1930s, Guy Ballard saw a UFO. Wait, no, it wasn't a UFO. He saw an alien. No. He saw Count Saint Germain. And here's an interesting thing. There are some rumors, obviously unconfirmed because his very existence is unconfirmed, but there are some people that have started to wonder if Count Saint Germain himself might be a Lemurian. And there have been reports of him on the mountain, which led to the founding of the I Am movement, which is one of the mystery schools and talking about the Hermetic Masters and the Ascended Ones and all that stuff. And it led to over 1 million followers in the late 1930s until Ballard's death. Now, what's really interesting is they even say that there is the city of Telos hidden under Mount Shasta. Telos is supposedly where the Lemurians were hiding out until they decided to come back and rejoin society in LA over in Mount Shasta. And they have this city underground, like a city of pure light vibrations and frequencies. And they live underground under the mountain, and they have UFOs spotted in the clouds over there. And they say that the UFOs drop off supplies, and they've seen these Lemurians, as they call them. They say these are more human-like in their descriptions, and they say they're about maybe 6 to 7 feet tall, and they are just normal human-like, just a little extra tall. And they come down and they buy lard and salt and sulfur, very alchemical ingredients. And then they go back to their little town under Telos and they just chill out. And there was even a story of a scientist in the 1930s who was at the local observatory and used his observatory telescope and actually saw the Lemurians doing some sort of ritual. And they say that, according to the rumors, they say this ritual, whatever they were doing, was actually bringing beings of light through a portal into this world, and nobody really understood what was going on. They had like 4 or 5 articles in the 1930s about people seeing Lemurians in town, and it was just wild. There was so much going on. And the thing about Count Saint Germain is, we all know he's immortal and all this other stuff. And they say they've had reports of him on the mountain. So what I'm wondering, here's my own personal conspiracy theory that I've created throughout all my research. My final conclusion is, I wonder, what if the Lemurians and the Hopi Native Americans are one and the same. Maybe the Lemurians went into hiding at the end of the cataclysm between them and Antarctica. I won't spend too much time on it, but if anyone doesn't know, they basically had a nuclear war with each other. Antarctica were the aggressors. Lemurians were a high vibrational, high frequency, highly spiritual culture who only wanted to seek peace. And the Antarctic people, I just realized what I was saying. The Atlanteans wanted to fight them because the Atlanteans were greedy and all this stuff. And they got into a big fight, and it basically ended the world. And the pole shift occurred, as we briefly mentioned earlier. And when that all happened, I personally believe Atlantis was a mistranslation. It was not a city underwater. It was intended to be a city on water with aqueducts, irrigation, farming, stuff like that. And I think what happened is when that pole shift occurred, all their water that they had in all those aqueducts, it broke and it froze the entire land. And that's why Antarctica is where it is located at now. And that would also, if my theory were correct, that would be a very good explanation for how the hell Antarctica has 70% of the world's water, despite getting less than 2 inches of rain per year with desert-like conditions. Now I will let you guys speak. Go ahead and start us off, Rob.
What do you want me to say?
Oh,
you didn't really say anything. You didn't ask anything. I was like, let me tell you about my day. So first of all, I got up and got some oatmeal.
Like, tell us what you think about Lemuria, Antarctica. They're a big fight, and if like what you think about Count Saint Germain being on the mountain, and if you think they're really living in this underground city called Talos.
I think that the more people are people, the more ridiculous things they'll make up.
Yeah.
Like it's cool in theory, but I think there's also times when you have to say, okay, you got to start being like, okay, you have to start separating, right? Like Spider said, there's a place where there's this, and then there's the middle, and usually the things in the middle.
Yeah.
So I think to me that is, it's tough because while I do believe that nuclear war has happened on the planet in ancient past, like Rajasthan, where they have measurable radiation, right? I think if that was the case, people would be like, hey, Mount Shasta has radiation. And I've never heard that from Mount Shasta. I've never heard
it's already faded because it was so long ago.
That's a tough one because Rajasthan still has radioactivity. And the Sahara also has glass, like, extreme heat into sand will turn to glass.
Yeah. But I honestly don't know how long it takes for radiation to disappear, but I do know that it will happen eventually. And what are the timelines, if any of us actually know, between those civilizations and, like Atlantis and Lemuria? Are they around the same time? Are they more recent, older?
I think that a lot of these civilizations, Atlantis is the quintessential,
the one everyone talks about,
civilization, right?
Yeah.
That's tough because maybe they did
exist all
at the same time, but it's all conjecture. It's not like we can go out and prove it. Because people think people obviously in the chat, people think we just making up random things. So that's a tough one. Like I said, nuclear war, in certain places, yes, but I feel like that somebody would put out that theory, and nobody's put that theory out about Mount Shasta. You could be the first one.
Oh no, I'm not saying that the war happened in Mount Shasta.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And as for Count Saint Germain, that dude does whatever he wants to do. I can't control him.
And Spider, what do you think about all this?
a lot of these ancient stories of old civilizations, again, are things that at some point in the past, someone witnessed something. They did their best to describe it, they did their best to write it down. The original account was probably lost, and somebody else said, "Hey, I heard this guy talking about this. I'm going to write down what he said." And then the next person said, "Oh, I'm going to recopy what they said with some embellishment. I'm going to do the King James treatment on it, and I'm going to make it good for what I want to believe," and things like that. And it could have been so simple as one thing that I wonder is that back during the times of the Greeks and well, the ancient Greeks, of course, because Greek people are obviously still around. Hello, Greece. Not to devalue your people in any way, but the ancient, like Troy and Athens and Greece and all that other kind of stuff, they had raids from a group of tribes called the Sea Peoples that were kind of like pirates, but they were kind of like Vikings in a certain sort of in how they raided the coastline. They went all up and down the Mediterranean. They took what they wanted. Nobody knew exactly where they came from, and we still don't know exactly where they came from because we don't have enough historical evidence or archaeological evidence. We have guesses. We can say, well, the Sea Peoples are made up of this DNA type of people who came from here, but also this DNA people who came from here. And so then you start to wonder, well, if you were on the coast and you were constantly raided by these people who were better than you, who could defeat all of your soldiers, who could take what they wanted all up and down the coast with no reprisal for years and years and years, you might wonder, well, where do they come from? They come from a mythical land that's more advanced than we are. They have better things than we do. They're obviously by the gods. And then when the raids stop, maybe you'll wonder, maybe the gods did something to them. Maybe the gods took their continent and sunk it. Maybe they punished them, and you come up with a story and you tell your neighbor that story, and he tells his neighbor that story, and then they tell a famous traveling historian, this is the story. It's Pluto. Atlantis. It's what happened.
Plato.
And then it becomes an entire continent that had crystal harmonics, and they had this, and they had lasers, and they had whatever, when it was really just tribal pirates running up and down the coast, coming from different places. Maybe they had island getaways. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just had a place that they could hang out that nobody's found yet to say, hey, this is where we stash our stuff. This is where we plan our raids. And then you have the legend of Atlantis. And it could lead to so many other things. And the same thing with potentially with Hyperborea or with Lemuria or with all these things, because we don't know. We weren't there. The methods they had of keeping track of information were much more primitive, despite the fact of however we might feel about whether the people were primitive or not is besides the point. The methods that they used to preserve their information is on stone, it's on papyrus, it's on things that obviously are much more
the Dead Sea Scrolls,
different
tablets.
They're much more low tech than what we have now, and that's all we've got to go on. So is Lemuria, did it really exist as a large continent? Maybe, maybe not. Did Atlantis really exist as a large continent? Maybe not. Or maybe it was just a bunch of people going out doing raids, doing things that made them look like they were a superpower, and the people just couldn't defend it. So it's just something to think about in the long term.
Now I got one last little Easter egg. As far as I looked up some of their mythological technology, and I got one that really stood out to me that I would like to mention before we end the show tonight. We were talking about UFOs briefly tonight, and what part of the core of Lemurian technology was known as resonance sovereignty, according to the mythology. They say the Lemurians did not separate technology from spirituality. To them, all energy was living. Every tool was an extension of consciousness or a mirror. And where we build from metal, they sculpted from vibration. Where we program with code, yes, vibranium, they encoded with intent. Their technology was not smart, it was alive. And that stood out to me because you've heard people sometimes mention biologic UFOs, and it responded to the frequency of the use of the pole. At the heart of this system was what we now call resonance sovereignty, the principle that only beings of matching resonance could operate a device, open a portal, or activate a crystal mechanism. As Spider mentioned earlier, we have a lot of myths about this crystal technology and all that. No hacking, no theft, no force. A sword, ship, or gateway was useless in the hands of the unworthy. And I've heard a lot of stories about they try to break into these UFOs, and sometimes like nothing can break through it and they can't get into it. And I wonder if maybe that has something to do with it.
I don't think the UFO is necessarily biologically alive.
Not like alive, but like it has some sort of, I don't know how else to word it, a consciousness to where it can recognize the user based on a spiritual essence that they give out. Like
biological computing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I get it. Almost like you would put your hand on a scanner so that the scanner recognizes you.
But it wouldn't be based on fingerprints. It would be based on frequency, which we do believe in, do we not?
Yeah. No, and listen, if you tune something to your frequency, it does things to your organs, it does things to your body. So I get what you're saying.
That's how they say the aliens can phase through solid objects.
Yeah, because all you need to do is just make your molecules smaller than the molecules of a door. So excellent, yes.
And Spider, did you have any final thoughts?
No, I think I've bombarded you with information enough for this evening.
We beat that boy up with this, didn't we?
I threw everything I had at you, so
I had another.
Get out of here! All right, everyone. That was a fantastic show, Steven. You did an excellent job. Spider, what are you talking about next week? What is that cat doing? Get that cat together. What is it doing?
This is X-rated. We can't watch that over there. What are we doing?
This is not the kind of show for this. What is going on over here?
Hey, wait a second.
I didn't even do anything. What are you doing?
That was inappropriate.
But next week, we're going to continue with our Lost Civilizations, but we're going to be a little more grounded. We're not going to be necessarily talking about things that were more mystical, but we're going to be talking about Phrygia, which does have some mythology because it was the home kingdom of Midas with the golden touch.
Ooh, nice.
And they said they found something related to Midas recently in the archaeological news.
Yes. So it's going to be very interesting to get into that. We're going to talk about how that's the various different tribes of that nature have shaped modern Turkey, because that's where that's at. And a lot of good stuff. We're going to have some good conversation. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Excellent. That is what's up. So this ends this episode 346 of This Uncanny Earth, your favorite paranormal podcast. I hope everybody out there has a beautiful day, night, wherever you're listening from. Thank you so much. And as always, why be boring when you could be uncanny? We will see all of you beautiful people next week.